Okay, so the central neural system. The brain is a central information processing organ of our body and acts as a command and control system. It controls the voluntary movements, balance of the body, functioning of the vital involuntary organs, lungs, heart, and kidneys. Okay, then thermoregulation, then hunger, thirst, circadian, that is 24-hour rhythms of our body, activities of several endocrine glands, and human behavior. It is also the site for processing of vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotions, and thoughts. Right. The human brain is well protected by the skull. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by cranial meninges. So human brain is well protected by the skull. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by cranial meninges. Now consists an outer layer called the dura mater, a very thin middle layer that is the arachnoid, and inner layer which is in contact with the brain tissue called pia mater. So dura mater is an on outer layer, arachnoid, that is a very thin middle layer, and then inner layer which is in contact with the brain tissue called pia mater. Now, so they have the cranial meanings, dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. Now the brain can be divided into three major parts, that is forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Now diagram showing sagittal section of the human brain. Now cerebral hemisphere, as you can see there is a corpus callosum, then cerebrum. The forebrain contains cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Now cerebrum is divided into cerebral cerebral hemispheres. Then it connected by the fibers of nerve tracts, that is corpus callosum. Then on the adjacent side of the thalamus hypothalamus there is a midbrain, and then on the lower side you can see cerebral aqueduct that passes through the midbrain, and then there is a hindbrain that contains first pons, then cerebellum on the back side, and then medulla. It's kind of stick, then the spinal cord. So this is the sagittal section of the human brain. Now talking about the forebrain. The forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Now cerebrum forms the major part of the human brain. A deep cleft divides the cerebrum longitudinally into two halves, which are termed as the left and right cerebral hemisphere. The hemispheres are connected by a tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum. The layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere is called the cerebral cortex. The layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere is called the cerebral cortex. So there is one layer that covers the cerebral hemisphere is called the cerebral cortex, and is thrown into prominent folds. The cerebral cortex is referred to as the grey matter due to its greyish appearance. Now this cerebral cortex is referred to as the grey matter due to its greyish appearance. The neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. Now the neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas, and large regions that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas, and large regions that are neither clearly sensory or nor motor in function. So cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas, and large areas that are neither nearly clearly sensory or nor motor in function. Now these regions called as the association areas are responsible for complex functions like intersensory association, memory, and communication. So these regions are called the association areas because they are neither motor areas, sensory areas, and large areas that are neither clearly sensory or nor motor in function. So these are association areas. They are responsible for complex functions like intersensory association, memory, and communication. Now fibers of the tracts are covered with myelin sheath. Which constitute the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere. So the fibers of the tracts are covered with myelin sheath, which constitute the inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere. They give an opaque white appearance of the layer, and hence is called the white matter. Now the cerebrum wraps around a structure called thalamus, right, which is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. Which are talking about the thalamus, right. Another very important part of the brain is hypothalamus, lies at the base of the thalamus. The hypothalamus contains a number of centers which control body temperatures, urge for eating and drinking. It also contains several groups of neurosecretory cells we are going to study in next chapter, which secrete hormones called hypothalamic hormones. The inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere and a group of deep associated structures like amygdala, hippocampus, etc. form a complex structure called the limbic lobe or limbic system. So okay, the inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere and the associated deep structure, the amygdala, hippocampus, they form a limbic system or limbic lobe. Now along with the hypothalamus, that is the limbic system plus hypothalamus, it is involved in the regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotional reactions, excitement, pleasure, rage, fear, and motivation. So this is, so association areas are different, limbic and lobe and limbic system, these are different. Okay, you can see. Now going to the next part, that is midbrain. So midbrain is located between the thalamus, hypothalamus of the forebrain and pons of the hindbrain. So midbrain is located between the thalamus, hypothalamus of the forebrain and pons of the hindbrain. A canal called the cerebral aqueduct passes through the midbrain, right? The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of four round swelling, that is lobes called corpora quadrigemina. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of four round swellings. Portion of the midbrain consists mainly four round swellings, that is lobes called corpora quadrigemina. Okay. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum, and medulla, also called the medulla oblongata. So hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum, and medulla, also called the medulla oblongata. Now pons consist of fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. So pons consist of fiber tracts. It has the fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. Now cerebellum has very convoluted surface in order to provide the additional space for many more neurons. The medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. So the medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. The medulla contains centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. So respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. Three major regions make up the brainstem, that is midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. The three major regions make up the brainstem, that is midbrain, pons, and except the cerebellum. Okay, that is the part of the hindbrain. So other two parts are involved, and the extra is the midbrain. So midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Now brainstem forms the connections between the brain and spinal cord. So brainstem forms the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, now, so this is your chapter is done in here, right? Now summary, we are okay, summary is left now. So this is it.